The smell of disinfectant burned Simone's nostrils as consciousness slowly returned. Her head felt like it had been split open with an axe, and every breath sent sharp pains through her ribs. Through the haze of medication, she could hear voices in the hallway outside her hospital room. The doctor said she might not make it through the night. Brandon's voice drifted through the partially open door. Her husband sounded different somehow. Distant. Cold. Good, a woman's voice replied. A voice Simone didn't recognize. We can't have any complications now. Simone's blood turned to ice. She tried to move, but her body felt like dead weight. Bandages covered her face and arms. Her left leg was in a cast. But it was the conversation outside that made her truly unable to breathe. The insurance money will come through once they declare her dead, Brandon continued. Plus the inheritance money from her grandmother. $15 million, Candace. We'll be set for life. Candace? Who was Candace? You're sure the brakes were completely cut? The woman asked. I'm sure. There's no way she should have survived that crash down the mountain. The car was completely destroyed. I can't believe she's still breathing. Simone's heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away. The car accident. She remembered now. Driving home from her grandmother's funeral last week. The brakes not working. The terrible moment when she realized she was going to die. The last thing she remembered was her car flying off the cliff. But it wasn't an accident. Her own husband had tried to murder her. The nurse said she's been unconscious for 4 days, Brandon said. Her brain activity is minimal. Even if she wakes up, she'll probably be a vegetable. Don't say probably, Candace snapped. We need certainty. Too much money is at stake. Simone forced herself to stay perfectly still as footsteps approached her door. Through barely opened eyes, she saw Brandon enter with a blonde woman she'd never seen before. The woman was pretty in a cheap way, with too much makeup and clothes that showed too much skin. Brandon looked down at Simone with no emotion in his eyes. The man who used to kiss her forehead every morning before work was staring at her like she was already dead. Like she was nothing more than an obstacle to his money. Beautiful Simone, he said mockingly, running a finger down her bandaged cheek. You always were too trusting. Too naive. Did you really think I married you for love? Candace laughed. Look at her now. Not so beautiful anymore. The inheritance money should clear probate within a month of her death, Brandon continued. Her grandmother left everything to her. $15 million from that old woman's investments and property sales. I've been waiting for this moment for 2 years. 2 years. Simone's grandmother had been sick for 2 years. Which meant Brandon had been planning this for 2 years. Their entire marriage had been a lie. What about the life insurance? Candace asked. Another $2 million. Plus the house is worth at least $800,000. Brandon straightened up. We just need her to die. Simone felt bile rise in her throat, but she forced herself to remain motionless. They were talking about her death like it was a business transaction. Like she was livestock to be slaughtered for profit. The doctors said her internal injuries are severe, Brandon continued. Collapsed lung, internal bleeding, brain trauma. Nature should take its course soon enough. And if it doesn't? Candace moved closer to the bed. Brandon's voice dropped to a whisper. Then we help nature along. After they left, Simone lay in the darkness fighting every instinct to scream, to cry, to call for help. But she couldn't. Not yet. If they knew she was conscious, if they knew she had heard their plan, they would finish the job immediately. She had to be smarter than them. She had to survive. Over the next hour, pieces of memory came flooding back. Brandon's sudden interest in her grandmother's will. His new business partner, that he mentioned but never introduced her to. The way he'd been pushing her to update her own will, making him the sole beneficiary. His insistence that she drive to her grandmother's funeral alone because he had important business meetings. It had all been planned. Every detail. The nurse came in to check on her. A kind-faced black woman around 40 years old. I know you can hear me, honey, the nurse whispered. I've been doing this for 15 years. I can tell when someone's really unconscious and when they're pretending. Your husband and that woman don't know I was listening to their conversation. Simone's heart raced. My name is Patricia, the nurse continued softly. And if you want to survive this, you're going to need help. Squeeze my hand if you understand. Simone managed to apply the slightest pressure to Patricia's hand. Good girl. Now listen carefully. They're planning to kill you tonight. I heard them talking to someone on the phone about making it look like your injuries got worse. We need to get you out of here. For the first time since waking up, Simone felt something other than terror. She felt hope. I'm going to help you disappear, Patricia whispered. But first, we need everyone to think you're dead. 3 months earlier, Simone had been living a completely different life. She woke up each morning in the small house she shared with Brandon, made coffee, and got ready for her job as a teacher at the local elementary school. She was happy. Or at least she thought she was. The call came on a Tuesday morning while she was helping her second-grade students with their reading assignments. "Mrs. Richardson? This is Attorney Johnson from Johnson & Associates. I'm calling about your grandmother, Eleanor Washington's estate." Simone had stepped into the hallway to take the call. Her grandmother had passed away peacefully in her sleep the week before, and Simone was still grieving. Eleanor Washington had raised Simone after her parents died in a house fire when she was 8 years old. She was the only family Simone had left. "I need you to come to my office as soon as possible to discuss your inheritance," the lawyer had said. Simone assumed there might be a few $1,000s and maybe some family jewelry. Her grandmother had lived modestly in a small apartment and never talked about money. She was wrong. "Your grandmother was a very wealthy woman," Attorney Johnson explained when Simone arrived at his office that afternoon. "She inherited a significant amount of money from your grandfather's military pension and investments, plus she owned several properties that she sold over the years. She was quite smart with her money." The lawyer slid a document across the desk. "The total value of her estate is approximately $15 million. And she's left everything to you." Simone stared at the paper, certain she had misheard. $15 million? "Yes. Properties, investments, cash savings, and a life insurance policy. Your grandmother lived frugally, but she invested wisely. She wanted to make sure you would never have to worry about money." Simone's hands shook as she signed the papers. $15 million. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of. Enough to quit teaching if she wanted to. Enough to travel the world. Enough to buy a big house and start the family she and Brandon had been talking about. When she got home that evening, Brandon was waiting for her with flowers and champagne. "I heard the news from Attorney Johnson's office," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Baby, we're rich." At the time, Simone had been touched by his excitement. She thought he was happy for her, for them. She didn't notice how quickly the conversation turned to numbers and logistics. "We should move the money into our joint account," Brandon suggested over dinner. "That way we can both manage it." "Don't you think we should wait?" Simone asked. "I mean, it's a lot of money. Maybe we should talk to a financial advisor first." Brandon's smile tightened slightly, but Simone didn't catch it. "Baby, I've been handling our finances for 3 years. I know what I'm doing. Plus, if something happened to you, I'd want to be able to access the money to take care of everything." The comment should have been a red flag, but Simone was still in shock about the inheritance. She agreed to add Brandon's name to the accounts. Over the next few weeks, Brandon's behavior started to change in small ways. He became obsessed with the money, constantly talking about investments and asking detailed questions about the inheritance process. He started coming home late, claiming he was meeting with business associates about investment opportunities. "I met this woman, Candace Miller," he told Simone one evening. "She's a financial consultant. Really smart. She has some ideas about how we can double our money within a year. Don't you think 15 million is enough?" Simone asked. "We don't need to take risks." Brandon's jaw clenched. "It's not about needs, Simone. It's about being smart. Rich people don't stay rich by being conservative. They take calculated risks." He started bringing up this Candace woman more and more. How smart she was. How successful. How much money she had made for her other clients. "I think you should meet her," Brandon said one night. "She could really help us." But somehow they never got around to arranging that meeting. Brandon always had an excuse. Candace was too busy. Candace was traveling. Candace was working on a big deal. Looking back now, lying in that hospital bed, Simone realized that Brandon had never intended for them to meet. Because Candace wasn't just his business partner. She was his lover. And they were both planning to murder her for her money. The signs had all been there. Brandon's sudden interest in updating their wills. His questions about the inheritance timeline. His insistence that all the money be moved into accounts he could access. The mysterious phone calls he took in private. The way he started working out and buying new clothes like he was trying to impress someone. Even the way he made love to her had changed. It became mechanical, distant. Like he was already thinking of someone else. The final piece of the puzzle had been the car. 2 weeks before her grandmother's funeral, Brandon had insisted they take her car in for routine maintenance. "The brakes feel a little soft," he had said. "I want to make sure you're safe driving." He had taken the car to a shop she'd never heard of. A place his friend recommended. When she got the car back, Brandon said everything was fine. The brakes were perfect. But they weren't. When she drove to her grandmother's funeral, she had noticed the brakes felt different, softer. But she trusted Brandon. She trusted her husband. That trust had almost killed her. Now, as she lay in the hospital bed pretending to be unconscious, Simone felt something she had never experienced before. Pure cold rage. Brandon had stolen 3 years of her life. He had pretended to love her while planning her death. He had used her grief over her grandmother's death as an opportunity to murder her. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had failed to finish the job. And now, Simone was going to make him pay for that mistake in ways he couldn't imagine. Patricia had been working at City General Hospital for 15 years, and she had seen every kind of family drama imaginable. But she had never seen anything as cold-blooded as what Brandon Richardson and his girlfriend were planning. "I've been listening to their conversations," Patricia whispered to Simone during her midnight rounds. "They're not just planning to kill you. They've already been living like you're dead." Simone squeezed Patricia's hand, their signal for her to continue. "That woman, Candace, has been staying at your house. She's wearing your clothes, driving your car, using your credit cards. They told everyone you died in the accident but that your body was too damaged for an open casket funeral. They had a memorial service 3 days ago. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. They had already buried her. Already moved on with their lives. Already started spending her money. There's more," Patricia continued. "I overheard them on the phone with someone today. Sounds like they've been planning this for months. They have fake documents ready to transfer all your assets. Brandon filed a death certificate claim with your life insurance company yesterday." Simone felt sick. While she had been fighting for her life in this hospital bed, they had been dismantling her entire existence. "The police haven't been notified because Brandon told the hospital administration that he wanted to handle everything privately due to the traumatic nature of your injuries. He's been signing papers as your next of kin, authorizing them to keep you on minimal life support until your body gives up naturally." This meant no one else knew she was alive. No friends, no co-workers, no one from her grandmother's church. As far as the world knew, Simone Richardson had died in a car accident, and her loving husband was grieving privately. "I found their phone records," Patricia said, pulling out a small notebook. "Candace Miller has been calling Brandon every day for the past 2 months. But the call started way before your grandmother died. This isn't just about your inheritance money. They've been having an affair for at least 6 months. 6 months. Simone closed her eyes, remembering all the signs she had missed. Brandon's sudden interest in working out. New cologne. Late nights at work. Business trips she couldn't verify. The way he started taking his phone with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. "I also found out where they've been meeting," Patricia continued. "Candace has an apartment downtown. According to the building's visitor logs, Brandon's been signing in there 3 or 4 times a week since January. January. That was when Simone's grandmother's health started declining rapidly. When they knew she didn't have much time left. When Brandon started planning murder. The really sick part? Patricia's voice was barely audible. They're already engaged. I saw the ring on her finger today. They're planning to get married as soon as your death certificate is finalized." Simone felt something break inside her chest. Not physically, but something deeper. The last piece of her heart that had been holding on to the hope that maybe Brandon had just gotten greedy, that maybe he still loved her somewhere deep down. But you don't get engaged to someone else while your wife is dying in the hospital unless love was never part of the equation. "I've been documenting everything," Patricia said. "Conversations I've overheard, phone calls, visits, everything. I know you can't respond right now, but I need you to know that when you're ready, we'll have evidence." Over the next 2 days, Patricia continued gathering information. She learned that Candace Miller was a former stripper who now claimed to be a financial consultant, but had no actual credentials. She had been targeting wealthy men for years, but Brandon was her biggest catch yet. "She has a record," Patricia whispered during one of her visits. "Fraud, identity theft, forgery. She served 18 months in prison 2 years ago. Your husband is planning to murder you for a convicted criminal." The full scope of their betrayal became clear when Patricia overheard them planning the final phase of their scheme. "The doctor said her brain activity is still too high," Candace said. "We need to do something to speed this up." "I have an idea," Brandon replied. "I'll tell them I want to say goodbye privately. Then I'll disconnect the machines for a few minutes. Make it look like equipment failure. What if someone catches you? Who's going to catch me? I'm her grieving husband. If anyone walks in, I'll just say I was overcome with emotion and accidentally bumped into something." They were planning to murder her that very night. Patricia's shift ended at 11 p.m., but she stayed late, hiding in the supply closet across from Simone's room. At 11:30, Brandon arrived alone. He stood by Simone's bed for a moment, looking down at her with no emotion in his eyes. "I actually thought I loved you once," he said quietly. "But love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't buy houses and cars and vacations. $15 million though. That changes everything." He reached toward the ventilator that was helping her breathe. "Mr. Richardson?" Patricia stepped into the room, pretending she had just arrived for her rounds. "I didn't expect to see you here so late." Brandon's hand jerked away from the machine. "I couldn't sleep. I wanted to sit with her for a while. Of course. Let me just check her vitals real quick, then I'll give you some privacy." Patricia busied herself with the monitors, making sure Brandon couldn't get near any of the equipment. After a few minutes he made an excuse about being tired and left. But Simone knew he would be back. And next time, Patricia might not be there to stop him. That's when they made the decision that would change everything. "We're getting you out of here tonight," Patricia whispered after Brandon left. "I have a plan, but it's risky. Are you ready to disappear?" Simone squeezed her hand once for yes. It was time to become a ghost. It was time to let Brandon and Candace think they had won. Because the only way to destroy them was to let them believe she was dead while she planned their complete destruction from the shadows. The plan had to be perfect. One mistake and Simone would be truly dead within hours. Patricia had worked at City General long enough to know every blind spot, every shift change, every security protocol. She also knew which doctors could be trusted and which ones asked too many questions. "Dr. Reeves is working the night shift," Patricia explained. "He's a good man, but he follows protocol to the letter. We can't involve him. But Dr. Martinez in the ER owes me a favor, and she's worked plenty of domestic violence cases. She'll understand what we're dealing with." The plan was simple but dangerous. Patricia would create a medical emergency in another part of the hospital to draw security away from Simone's wing. During the chaos, she would move Simone to a service elevator that connected directly to the hospital's loading dock. Dr. Martinez would be waiting there with a van. "The hardest part is going to be moving you," Patricia said. "Your injuries are real. You have broken ribs, a fractured leg, and you've been on pain medication for 5 days. This is going to hurt." Simone was ready. Pain was nothing compared to being murdered by her own husband. At 2 a.m., Patricia put the plan into motion. She pulled the fire alarm on the pediatric floor, claiming she smelled smoke. While security and staff rushed to investigate, she quickly disconnected Simone from the monitors and helped her into a wheelchair. Moving hurt worse than anything Simone had ever experienced. Her broken ribs screamed with every breath, and her casted leg felt like it was on fire. But she bit down on her tongue to keep from crying out. The service elevator was ancient and loud. Every floor they passed felt like an eternity. If someone discovered her missing before they reached the loading dock, it would all be over. Dr. Martinez was waiting exactly where Patricia said she would be. She was a small woman with kind eyes and steady hands. "Let's get you out of here," she said, helping Simone into the back of a medical transport van. "I've seen what men like your husband do to women. You're brave as hell for fighting back." They drove through the empty city streets to Dr. Martinez's private clinic on the other side of town. It was a small facility where she treated undocumented immigrants and domestic violence victims who couldn't go to regular hospitals. "You'll be safe here while you recover," Dr. Martinez said. "But we need to make sure no one can trace you. What do you want to do about your identity?" Simone had been thinking about this since the moment she heard Brandon planning her murder. She couldn't use her real name, her social security number, her bank accounts, or anything that connected her to her old life. She needed to become someone completely different. "I have a friend who helps women in situations like yours," Patricia said. "Women who need to disappear completely. She can get you new identification, but it'll take a few weeks." Those few weeks were the hardest of Simone's life. She was physically healing from her injuries while emotionally processing the complete destruction of everything she thought she knew about her marriage. But she wasn't just healing. She was planning. Every day, Patricia brought her updates on what Brandon and Candace were doing. They had moved into Simone's house together immediately after her death. They were already spending her money, buying expensive clothes and jewelry, taking trips, living like royalty. "They had a party last weekend," Patricia reported. "A celebration of life party, they called it. But I saw the pictures on Candace's social media. They were laughing and drinking champagne while toasting to your memory." The rage that had been building inside Simone crystallized into something cold and sharp. They weren't just thieves and murderers. They were monsters who celebrated the death of an innocent person. but their celebration was premature. Because Simone wasn't dead. And she was going to make sure they regretted every moment of happiness they had stolen from her. Patricia's friend came through with new identity documents. Simone Richardson was dead, but Sophia Williams was very much alive. The documents were perfect: driver's license, social security number, birth certificate, even college transcripts and work history. How is this possible? Simone asked. There are more women running from abusive husbands than you'd think, the woman explained. I help them disappear completely. Start fresh. Your husband will never be able to find you. But Simone didn't want to just disappear. She wanted justice. During her recovery, she had been researching Brandon and Candace extensively. She discovered that Candace had been running similar scams for years. She would target recently widowed or divorced men with money, seduce them, then either rob them or convince them to invest in fake business opportunities. But Brandon was different. Brandon was her first murder plot. I found something interesting, Patricia said during one of her visits. Candace has been married 3 times before. 2 of her ex-husbands died under suspicious circumstances. One was ruled a suicide, the other was a drug overdose. But both of them changed their wills right before they died, leaving everything to her. This wasn't just about Simone's inheritance money. Candace was a serial killer who used marriage as a weapon. And Brandon was her willing accomplice. After 6 weeks of recovery and planning, Simone was ready to begin her new life. She had healed enough to walk without assistance, and her broken ribs no longer made every breath agony. More importantly, she had developed a comprehensive plan for destroying Brandon and Candace's lives piece by piece. Are you sure about this? Dr. Martinez asked. You could just disappear. Start over somewhere else. Live quietly and safely. Simone looked at herself in the mirror. The physical scars were healing, but the emotional ones had transformed her into someone harder, smarter, more dangerous than she had ever been. They tried to kill me for my money, she said. Then they celebrated my death while spending that money. They don't get to win. They don't get to be happy. They don't get to live free after what they did. She had $15 million that they thought they could steal. But they had no idea that money was about to become the weapon she used to destroy them completely. The old Simone Richardson had been trusting and naive. But Sophia Williams was going to be their worst nightmare. Sophia Williams rented a small apartment across town under her new identity and began building the foundation for her revenge. The first step was accessing her own money without alerting Brandon and Candace. Through her research, she had discovered that her grandmother's estate included several offshore accounts and investments that Brandon didn't know about. These accounts were in Simone's name only, and Brandon couldn't access them without specific legal documents that he didn't have. Working with a new attorney who specialized in estate recovery, Sophia was able to access nearly $3 million that Brandon and Candace had no idea existed. This is highly unusual, the attorney admitted. Legally, you're supposed to be dead. But your grandmother was smart. She set up these accounts specifically to protect the money from anyone who might try to steal it, including spouses. Eleanor Washington had been more clever than anyone realized. She had lived through the Depression and 2 wars, and she understood that money could make people dangerous. The offshore accounts were her insurance policy against exactly the kind of situation Simone now faced. With access to money, Sophia began building her network. She hired a private investigator to document everything Brandon and Candace were doing. She retained a criminal defense attorney who specialized in attempted murder cases. She even hired a public relations firm to help manage what would eventually become a very public scandal. What exactly are you planning? The private investigator asked. Complete destruction, Sophia replied. I want them to lose everything. Their freedom, their money, their reputation, their relationship. Everything. The private investigator, a former police detective named Robert Chin, had worked hundreds of cases involving domestic violence and financial fraud. But he had never worked with a victim who was this organized and determined. I have to warn you, he said. Revenge can consume you. It can take over your life and turn you into the kind of person you're trying to punish. Sophia considered this. They already consumed my life when they tried to murder me. The difference is I'm going to make sure justice is served. Over the next 3 months, Sophia built an airtight case against Brandon and Candace. The private investigator documented their spending sprees, their lavish lifestyle, their public displays of affection while claiming to be grieving Simone's death. More importantly, he uncovered evidence of the murder plot. Bank records showing payments to the mechanic who sabotaged Simone's car. Text messages between Brandon and Candace planning the accident. Even audio recordings of their conversations about killing Simone that Patricia had managed to capture on her phone. "This is enough to put them away for life," the criminal attorney said. "Attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, identity theft. We're talking about 25 to life for both of them." But Sophia wanted more than just criminal justice. She wanted them to experience the same kind of betrayal and devastation they had put her through. That's when she developed the second phase of her plan, financial warfare. Using her legitimate identity as Sophia Williams, she began buying up Brandon's debts. His credit cards, his car loan, the mortgage on the house he now shared with Candace. She purchased these debts through shell companies, so Brandon had no idea that his dead wife now owned his financial obligations. She also began investigating Candace's background more thoroughly. What she found was a pattern of fraud and theft going back 15 years. Candace had stolen money from employers, defrauded elderly men, and even embezzled from a children's charity. "She's been running the same con for years," Robert reported. "Target wealthy men, gain their trust, access their money, then disappear. Brandon is just the first one she decided to murder instead of just robbing." This gave Sophia another idea. If Candace had victimized other men, those men might be interested in helping bring her to justice. Working with Robert, Sophia tracked down 3 of Candace's previous victims. 2 of them had lost their life savings to her fake investment schemes. The third had been drugged and robbed after taking her on what he thought was a romantic weekend getaway. "She told me she loved me," one of the victims said. "I was recently divorced, lonely, vulnerable. She made me feel special. Then she disappeared with $40,000 of my money." Sophia convinced all 3 men to file police reports and cooperate with the investigation. Suddenly, Candace wasn't just facing charges related to Simone's case. She was looking at multiple counts of fraud, theft, and assault across 3 different states. But even that wasn't enough. Sophia wanted Brandon and Candace to feel the emotional betrayal she had experienced. She wanted them to lose the one thing they thought they could count on, each other. That's when she developed the most devious part of her plan. She was going to turn them against each other. Using her connections and resources, Sophia arranged for Brandon to accidentally discover that Candace had been stealing money from their joint accounts. She had Robert plant evidence that Candace was planning to disappear with all of Simone's inheritance money, leaving Brandon to face the murder charges alone. At the same time, she arranged for Candace to find out that Brandon had been planning to kill her too, once the inheritance money was safely in his possession. She had Robert create fake text messages and emails showing Brandon researching how to make Candace's death look like an accident. "Are you sure about this?" Robert asked. "Once they turn on each other, there's no going back." Sophia thought about the conversation she had overheard in the hospital. The way they had talked about her death like it was a business transaction. The way they had celebrated her murder while spending her money. "They made their choice when they decided to kill an innocent person for money," she said. "Now they get to live with the consequences." The trap was set. The evidence was compiled. The victims were ready to testify. The financial weapons were in place. All that remained was to spring the trap and watch their world burn to the ground. But first, there was one more piece of the puzzle Sophia needed to put in place. She needed allies who could help her rebuild her life after this was all over. She needed to learn how to trust again. She needed to learn how to love again. She needed to prove to herself that she could be more than just an instrument of revenge. Sophia had been living as a ghost for 6 months when she met Ethan Brooks at a coffee shop downtown. She wasn't looking for romance, she was meeting with her private investigator to review the latest evidence against Brandon and Candace. But when she accidentally bumped into a tall, handsome man reading legal briefs, something unexpected happened. She felt hope for the first time since the accident. "I'm so sorry," Sophia said, helping him gather his scattered papers. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "No harm done," Ethan replied, and his smile was warm and genuine in a way that made Sophia's heart skip. "These depositions are boring enough to put anyone to sleep. I could use the distraction." Ethan Brooks was a civil rights attorney who specialized in helping victims of domestic violence and financial fraud. He was smart, kind, and had the sort of quiet strength that came from fighting for justice every day of his career. "You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Would you like to sit down? Coffee's on me." Under normal circumstances, Sophia would have politely declined. She was in the middle of planning the destruction of 2 people who had tried to murder her. Romance was the last thing on her mind. But there was something about Ethan that made her feel safe. Maybe it was the way he looked directly into her eyes when he spoke. Maybe it was the photo on his phone screen showing him with a group of children at what looked like a charity event. Maybe it was just that she had been alone for so long that she had forgotten what genuine human connection felt like. "I'd like that," she said. They talked for 2 hours. Ethan told her about his work helping women escape abusive relationships and rebuild their lives. Sophia, still maintaining her cover identity, told him she was a consultant working on financial recovery cases. "It's rewarding work," she said carefully. "Helping people get back money that was stolen from them. Making sure criminals face consequences for their actions. That's important work," Ethan said. "Too often victims of financial crimes never get justice. The system is set up to protect the criminals instead of the people they hurt." Something in his voice told Sophia that he was speaking from personal experience. "My mother was swindled out of her life savings by a man she thought loved her," he continued. "This was 10 years ago after my father died. She was lonely and vulnerable, and this man took advantage of that. By the time we realized what was happening, he had disappeared with everything. Did you ever find him?" "Eventually. But the money was gone and he only served 18 months in prison. My mother never recovered emotionally or financially. She died 2 years later, still believing it was somehow her fault." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. Ethan's story was almost identical to what Candace had been doing to men for years. Taking advantage of grief and loneliness to steal everything they had. "I'm sorry," she said. "That's terrible." "It's why I do what I do," Ethan replied. "Someone has to fight for the victims. Someone has to make sure these predators don't get away with destroying people's lives." Over the next few weeks, Sophia found herself looking forward to her conversations with Ethan more than anything else in her day. They met regularly at the same coffee shop, ostensibly by coincidence but really because both of them wanted to see each other again. Slowly, carefully, Sophia began to let him into her life. Not the whole truth, she couldn't risk that yet, but pieces of who she really was underneath the revenge plot and the false identity. "You're different from other people I've met," Ethan said one evening as they walked along the river downtown. "There's something about you that seems, I don't know, like you've been through something that changed you fundamentally." Sophia's heart pounded. Had she revealed too much? Was her cover blown? "We've all been through things that change us," she said carefully. "True. But with you it feels deeper. Like you've seen the worst of what people can do to each other, but somehow you're still fighting to believe in goodness." He was more perceptive than she had realized. And more right than he knew. "What if someone you cared about had been hurt?" Sophia asked. "Really hurt by people they trusted? Would you help them get justice?" "Of course. But justice and revenge aren't the same thing." "What if they were in this case?" Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sophia, are you in some kind of trouble? Because if you are, I want to help you. That's what I do." For a moment, Sophia considered telling him everything. The murder plot, the fake death, the months of planning Brandon and Candace's destruction. She was tired of carrying the secret alone, and she trusted Ethan more than she had trusted anyone in years. But she wasn't ready. "Not yet. I'm working on a case," she said. "A complex case involving people who tried to kill someone for their money. When it's over, I'll tell you everything. But right now, I need you to trust me." Ethan studied her face for a long moment. "Does this case involve you personally?" "Yes." "Are you in danger?" "Not anymore. But I will be if the wrong people find out I'm alive." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Ethan's eyes widened. "Sophia, what exactly is going on?" She had said too much. But maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. "The people I'm investigating think I'm dead," she said. "And I need them to keep thinking that until I'm ready to spring the trap. If you can't handle that, if you can't trust me to know what I'm doing, then we should end this now." Ethan was quiet for a long time, processing what she had told him. "I've been an attorney for 12 years, he said finally. "I've worked with hundreds of women in dangerous situations. I know what it looks like when someone is running from people who want to hurt them. And I know what it looks like when someone is planning something that could put them in more danger." "Which one am I?" "Both." He reached out and took her hand. "I don't know what happened to you, but I know you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. I also know that revenge can destroy you if you let it consume your life." "What if revenge is just another word for justice?" "Then you make sure you don't lose yourself in the process." That night, Sophia realized that her feelings for Ethan had grown into something deeper than she had intended. She was falling in love with him, which was terrifying because love made people vulnerable. And she couldn't afford to be vulnerable while she was in the middle of destroying 2 people who had tried to murder her. But maybe that was exactly why she needed love in her life. Maybe the best revenge against people who had tried to take away her capacity for trust and joy was to prove that they had failed. Maybe the best way to beat monsters was to refuse to become one herself. "When this is over," she told Ethan that night, "I want to tell you everything. And I want to build something real with you if you're willing." "I'm willing," he said. "But promise me something. Promise me that when this is over, you'll choose the future instead of the past." "I promise." It was a promise she intended to keep. But first, she had to finish what Brandon and Candace had started when they decided to murder her for money. It was time to let them know that their victim was very much alive and very, very angry. The first crack in Brandon and Candace's perfect life came on a Tuesday morning when Brandon received a call from his mortgage company. "Mr. Richardson, we're calling to inform you that your mortgage has been sold to a new servicer. Effective immediately, all payments should be sent to Phoenix Financial Recovery." Brandon was confused. "Sold? What do you mean sold? I've never missed a payment." "That's correct, sir. But the original lender has the right to sell mortgages to other companies. This is very common. You'll receive paperwork in the mail with the new payment instructions." What Brandon didn't know was that Phoenix Financial Recovery was a shell company owned by Sophia Williams. His dead wife now owned his house. The same thing happened with his credit cards, his car loan, and even the small business loan he had used to start his fake consulting company with Candace. One by one, all of Brandon's debts were quietly purchased by companies that Sophia controlled. Meanwhile, Candace was dealing with her own mysterious problems. Her credit cards were being declined. Her bank accounts were being frozen for suspicious activity. Her apartment lease was terminated for lease violations she had never committed. "Someone is messing with us," Candace told Brandon. "This can't be a coincidence." "Don't be paranoid," Brandon replied. "It's just bad luck." But the bad luck kept coming. Brandon's consulting clients started canceling their contracts after receiving anonymous tips about his involvement in insurance fraud. Candace's fake investment company was investigated by the SEC after someone reported them for running a Ponzi scheme. The house they were living in, Simone's house, was placed under lien by the IRS for unpaid taxes they had never owed before. Their joint bank account was seized as part of a federal investigation into money laundering. Within 3 weeks, Brandon and Candace had gone from living like millionaires to scrambling to pay for groceries. "This is not random," Candace said, pacing around the living room. "Someone is targeting us specifically." "Who would want to target us?" Brandon asked. "Simone is dead. Her family is all dead. We don't have any enemies." But they did have enemies. They had victims. And those victims were starting to speak up. The first news story ran on the local ABC affiliate on a Thursday evening. Authorities are investigating a suspected murder plot involving a local woman who allegedly conspired with her lover to kill his wife for inheritance money. The woman, identified as Candace Miller, is also being investigated for multiple fraud schemes targeting elderly and recently widowed men. Brandon's blood went cold as he watched the news report. They showed Candace's mugshot from her previous arrest, along with photos of some of her victims. "They don't know anything," Candace said. "They're just fishing. We stick to our story. Simone died in a car accident. We're innocent victims of a witch hunt." But the witch hunt was just getting started. The next day, police arrived at the house with a search warrant. They seized Brandon's computers, his phone records, his financial documents. They took samples of his hair and fingerprints. They even dug up the backyard looking for evidence. "This is harassment," Brandon protested. "My wife is dead. We're grieving. You have no right to put us through this." "Actually, Mr. Richardson, we have every right," Detective Sarah Mitchell replied. "We have evidence that suggests your wife's death was not accidental. We also have evidence that you and Ms. Miller have been living off money that doesn't belong to you." "Evidence? How could they have evidence?" The answer came the following week when Patricia testified before a grand jury. She told them everything she had witnessed at the hospital. The conversations about murder. The plans to kill Simone. The celebration of her death. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source, Candace herself. Sophia had arranged for Candace to discover text messages on Brandon's phone suggesting that he was planning to kill her once the inheritance money was fully transferred. The messages were fake, created by Robert the private investigator, but they looked completely authentic. "You lying bastard," Candace screamed at Brandon. "You were planning to murder me too? What are you talking about? I would never hurt you. Then explain these messages about making my death look like an accident. Explain this research about untraceable poisons. Explain these emails about how to get away with murder." Brandon stared at the phone in horror. He had never written those messages. He had never researched poisons or planned Candace's death. Someone was framing him. But Candace didn't believe him. In her mind, Brandon was exactly the kind of man who would murder multiple wives for money. After all, she had watched him do it once already. "I'm not going down for this alone," she told him. "If you think you can pin everything on me and walk away free, you're wrong." That's when Candace made the biggest mistake of her life. She decided to cut a deal with the prosecutors. "I'll tell you everything," she said. "How we planned it, how we did it, everything. But I want immunity from the murder charges." "We're listening," Detective Mitchell replied. Candace confessed to everything. The affair that started 6 months before Simone's death. The plan to sabotage her car. The fake documents they had prepared to claim her inheritance. The celebration party they threw after her funeral. She also confessed to something the prosecutors didn't expect: her previous schemes and the other men she had victimized. "Brandon wasn't my first partner," she admitted. "I've been running cons like this for years. But he was the first one willing to actually kill someone." With Candace's confession, the case against Brandon became airtight. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and identity theft. But there was one problem with Candace's confession. She had admitted to murdering Simone Richardson. But Simone Richardson wasn't actually dead. And it was time for her to prove it. The day of Brandon's arraignment, Sophia sat in the back of the courtroom wearing a wig and sunglasses. She watched as her husband was led into the courtroom in handcuffs, looking haggard and defeated. Candace was already there, sitting at the prosecutor's table as part of her plea deal. She looked smug and satisfied, clearly believing she had outsmarted everyone. Neither of them noticed the woman in the back row. Neither of them recognized the wife they thought they had murdered. But they were about to. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "we have a surprise witness we'd like to call to the stand." The judge looked surprised. "This is an arraignment, not a trial." "Yes, Your Honor. But we believe this witness's testimony will significantly impact the defendant's plea." "Very well. Call your witness." The prosecutor smiled. "The state calls Simone Richardson." The courtroom fell silent. Brandon's face went white. Candace's mouth fell open. Anne Sophia Williams stood up, removed her wig and sunglasses, and walked toward the witness stand. The ghost had returned from the dead. And she was ready to testify. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as Simone walked toward the witness stand. Brandon's lawyer jumped to his feet, shouting objections about improper procedure and witness tampering. Candace began hyperventilating, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. But it was Brandon's reaction that satisfied Simone the most. Her husband, her would-be murderer, stared at her with absolute terror, as if he were seeing a ghost. Which, in a way, he was. "Your Honor, I object to this entire proceeding," Brandon's lawyer said. "If Mrs. Richardson is alive, then my client cannot be guilty of attempted murder." "Actually," the prosecutor replied, "attempted murder is still attempted murder, whether the victim survives or not. Your client sabotaged Mrs. Richardson's car with the intent to kill her. The fact that she survived doesn't change his criminal intent." Judge Williams, no relation to Sophia's new identity, called for order in the courtroom. "This is highly irregular, but I'm going to allow limited testimony to determine the facts of this case." Simone was sworn in using her real name. For the first time in 8 months, she was publicly Simone Richardson again, instead of hiding behind the identity of Sophia Williams. "Mrs. Richardson," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court what happened to you on the night of March 15th. "I was driving home from my grandmother's funeral when my brakes stopped working. My car went off a cliff on Mountain View Road and crashed into the ravine below." "What caused your brakes to fail?" "They were sabotaged. Someone cut the brake lines." "Do you know who sabotaged your car?" Simone looked directly at Brandon. "My husband, Brandon Richardson, arranged for the sabotage. He wanted me dead so he could inherit my grandmother's $15 million estate." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to take notes. Brandon's lawyer demanded a recess. Candace began sobbing, realizing that her confession to murdering a woman who was still alive had just destroyed any chance of leniency. "How do you know your husband was responsible?" the prosecutor continued. "Because I heard him talking about it in the hospital. I was conscious but pretending to be in a coma for my own safety. I heard him and his girlfriend, Candace Miller, discussing how they had planned my murder and how they were going to split my inheritance money." "What exactly did you hear?" Simone recounted the conversation she had overheard between Brandon and Candace. Their discussion of the sabotaged brakes. Their plans to get married after she died. their celebration of her death. They threw a party to celebrate my murder, Simone said, her voice steady but filled with controlled anger. While I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed, they were drinking champagne and spending my money. Brandon's lawyer tried desperately to poke holes in her testimony. Mrs. Richardson, if you've been alive all this time, why didn't you come forward sooner? Why did you let my client be arrested for a crime that allegedly didn't succeed? Because they tried to kill me, Simone replied. I had to make sure I was safe before I revealed myself. I also had to gather evidence to prove what they did. What evidence? The prosecutor introduced exhibits that made Brandon's blood run cold. Audio recordings of his conversations with Candace, captured by Patricia's hidden phone. Bank records showing payments to the mechanic who sabotaged Simone's car. Text messages between Brandon and Candace planning the murder. But the most damaging evidence was Candace's own confession. In trying to save herself, she had admitted to every detail of the murder plot. Her testimony was now being used to prosecute both of them. I'd like to question the defendant, Judge Williams said. Brandon was brought to the witness stand in handcuffs. He looked nothing like the confident, charming man Simone had married. Prison had aged him years in just a few weeks. His hair was greasy, his clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes darted around the courtroom like a trapped animal. Mr. Richardson, did you sabotage your wife's car? No, Your Honor. I would never hurt Simone. Do you deny having an affair with Candace Miller? Brandon hesitated. There was too much evidence to deny the affair. I made a mistake. I was unfaithful to my wife. But I never tried to kill her. Then how do you explain the recordings of you discussing her death? Those recordings are fake. Someone is trying to frame me. Simone watched her husband lie under oath and felt nothing but disgust. Even now, facing overwhelming evidence of his guilt, he was still trying to manipulate and deceive. Judge Williams turned to Candace. Ms. Miller, you've already confessed to participating in this murder plot. Do you stand by that confession? Candace looked like a deer caught in headlights. If she recanted her confession, she would lose her plea deal and face life in prison. If she maintained her confession, she was admitting to trying to kill a woman who was sitting right there in the courtroom. I was confused, she stammered. I thought she was dead. Brandon told me she was dead. So you're saying you confessed to murder because you were confused about whether the victim was actually dead? I don't know what I'm saying anymore. The judge had heard enough. Based on the evidence presented today, I'm denying bail for both defendants. Mr. Richardson, you're charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and identity theft. Ms. Miller, you're charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and accessory to attempted murder. As the bailiffs led Brandon and Candace away in handcuffs, Simone felt a sense of satisfaction she hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. They were finally facing consequences for their actions. But the legal proceedings were just the beginning. Over the next few months, the full scope of Brandon and Candace's crimes became public knowledge. Brandon's fake consulting business was revealed to be a money laundering operation. Candace's previous victims came forward with stories of fraud and theft going back more than a decade. The IRS discovered that they had been hiding assets and avoiding taxes on the money they had stolen from various victims. Their relationship, which had seemed so passionate and devoted when they were plotting Simone's murder, crumbled under the pressure of criminal prosecution. They turned on each other completely, each trying to minimize their own culpability by maximizing their partner's guilt. Brandon forced me to participate, Candace told reporters. He threatened to kill me if I didn't help him murder his wife. Candace was the mastermind, Brandon countered. She planned everything. I was just a victim of her manipulation. Their betrayal of each other was swift and complete. The love they had professed while planning Simone's death evaporated the moment their freedom was at stake. Simone watched it all from a distance, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice was finally being served. Sadness because she had wasted 3 years of her life loving a man who was capable of such evil. But she wasn't dwelling on the past anymore. She was building a future. The final phase of her revenge was about to begin. And it would be the sweetest justice of all. The trial began 6 months after Simone's dramatic appearance at Brandon's arraignment. By then, the case had become national news. The millionaire murder plot, as the media called it, had all the elements of a perfect crime story. Love, betrayal, attempted murder, and a victim who rose from the dead to seek justice. Simone had spent those 6 months rebuilding her life as herself rather than hiding behind the Sophia Williams identity. She moved back into her grandmother's house, which she had legally reclaimed from Brandon and Candace. She returned to teaching, though at a different school where she could start fresh. And most importantly, she had introduced Ethan to her real identity and integrated him into her actual life. "I can't believe you lived through all of that," Ethan said after she told him the complete story. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." "I'm not strong," Simone replied. "I'm just stubborn. I refuse to let them win." The trial was held in the same courthouse where Simone had first revealed herself to be alive. This time, she was the prosecution's star witness, and both Brandon and Candace were defendants facing life sentences. Candace's plea deal had fallen apart when she tried to recant her confession. The prosecution decided they had enough evidence to convict both defendants without her cooperation, so they withdrew the immunity offer and charged her as a full conspirator. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious spectators, and family members of Candace's other victims. Simone sat in the front row, directly across from the defendant's table, where Brandon and Candace avoided making eye contact with her. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Audio recordings of Brandon and Candace planning the murder. Financial records showing their motive. Testimony from the mechanic who sabotaged Simone's car. Patricia's eyewitness account of their conversations in the hospital. But the most powerful testimony came from Simone herself. "Mrs. Richardson," the prosecutor asked, "when you heard your husband and Ms. Miller discussing your death in the hospital, what went through your mind?" "Disbelief at first," Simone replied. "I couldn't accept that the man I loved, the man I had trusted with my life, was capable of murdering me for money. But as I listened to them talk, I realized that everything about our marriage had been a lie." "How so?" "Brandon never loved me. He saw me as an investment that would pay off when my grandmother died. He pretended to care about me while planning my death. That's a level of deception and cruelty that I never imagined possible." The defense attorneys tried to attack Simone's credibility, suggesting that she had faked her own death to frame Brandon and Candace. But the evidence was too overwhelming, and their arguments fell apart under scrutiny. The moment Simone had been waiting for came during Candace's testimony. Against her lawyer's advice, Candace had decided to testify in her own defense, claiming that Brandon had forced her to participate in the murder plot. "I was afraid of him," Candace said. "He threatened to kill me if I didn't help him. I'm a victim too." The prosecutor destroyed her credibility during cross-examination, showing evidence that Candace had been the one to research methods of murder and had actively encouraged Brandon to kill his wife. But it was what happened after her testimony that provided the most dramatic moment of the trial. As Candace was being escorted back to the defendant's table, she looked directly at Simone for the first time since the trial began. Their eyes met across the courtroom and Candace's face went white with terror. "No," Candace whispered. Then louder, "No, no, no. You're supposed to be dead." She began screaming hysterically, as if seeing Simone alive was more horrifying than facing life in prison. "We killed you. You died. I watched the car burn." The bailiffs had to restrain Candace as she collapsed, sobbing and screaming about ghosts and impossible things. Her complete breakdown was captured by the court cameras and broadcast live on national television. "She's haunting me," Candace cried as they carried her out of the courtroom. "The dead woman is haunting me." Brandon watched his former lovers melt down with disgust and fear. Even now, facing the consequences of their crimes, he was more concerned about how Candace's breakdown would affect his own case than he was about her mental state. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found both defendants guilty on all charges. Brandon was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Candace was sentenced to 35 years to life. As the sentences were read, Simone felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that justice had been served. Satisfaction that Brandon and Candace would spend the rest of their lives in prison. But also a strange emptiness, as if the anger that had sustained her for so long was finally leaving her body. "How do you feel?" a reporter asked her outside the courthouse. "Free," Simone replied. "For the first time in over a year, I feel free." That evening, Simone and Ethan had dinner at the same restaurant where she and Brandon had celebrated their first wedding anniversary. It felt appropriate to reclaim that space, to create new memories in a place that had once held painful ones. "What happens now?" Ethan asked. "Now I live my life," Simone said. "I've spent the last year focused on getting justice. Now I want to focus on building something positive." "Any regrets?" Simone considered the question. "I regret trusting Brandon. I regret not seeing through his lies. I regret the time I wasted on someone who never deserved my love. But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret making sure they faced consequences for what they did." "And us?" Ethan asked. What happens with us? Simone reached across the table and took his hand. I'd like to find out. I'd like to see what it feels like to love someone who actually loves me back. As they walked out of the restaurant together, Simone realized that her story wasn't really about revenge. It was about survival. It was about refusing to let evil people destroy her capacity for love and trust and joy. Brandon and Candace had tried to kill her body. But more than that, they had tried to kill her spirit. They had wanted to take away her ability to believe in goodness and love and justice. But they had failed. Simone was not only alive, she was thriving. She had her money back, her life back, and most importantly, her future back. The best revenge, she realized, wasn't destroying her enemies. It was proving that they couldn't destroy her. 1 year after the trial, Simone stood in the garden behind her grandmother's house, preparing for a very different kind of celebration. Today was her wedding day. The backyard had been transformed into a beautiful ceremony space, decorated with white flowers and flowing fabric that caught the afternoon breeze. 50 guests, friends, colleagues, and members of her grandmother's church filled the chairs arranged in neat rows facing a simple arch where Simone would marry Ethan Brooks. It was a small, intimate wedding, nothing like the elaborate affair she had planned with Brandon years ago. That wedding had been about show and expense and impressing people who didn't really matter. This wedding was about love and commitment and building a real partnership with someone who knew all of her secrets and loved her anyway. "You look beautiful," Patricia said, adjusting Simone's simple white dress. The nurse who had saved her life had become one of her closest friends over the past year. "Your grandmother would be so proud." Simone touched the pearl necklace that had belonged to Eleanor Washington. Her grandmother's jewelry was the only thing Brandon and Candace hadn't managed to steal. Because Simone had been wearing it the night of the accident and it had been returned to her at the hospital. "I hope so," Simone said. "I think she would have liked Ethan." "Are you kidding? A man who fights for justice and treats you like a queen? She would have adored him." The music started, and Simone walked down the short aisle toward the man she was choosing to spend her life with. Ethan looked handsome in his simple dark suit, and when he smiled at her, she felt the same flutter of happiness she had experienced that first day in the coffee shop. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Simone and Ethan in marriage." As they exchanged vows, Simone reflected on how different her life was now compared to a year ago. Then she had been consumed with anger and focused entirely on destroying the people who had tried to kill her. Now she was focused on building something beautiful with a man who genuinely loved her. "Simone," Ethan said during his vows, "you are the strongest, bravest, most incredible woman I have ever known. You survived the worst kind of betrayal and came out stronger on the other side. You refused to let evil people turn you into something bitter and broken. Instead, you chose healing and love and justice. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the trust you're placing in me." When they kissed after being pronounced husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause. But Simone was only aware of Ethan's arms around her and the feeling of complete safety and love that she had never experienced with Brandon. During the reception, Robert Chin, the private investigator who had helped her build the case against Brandon and Candace, approached with an update she had been waiting for. "I thought you'd want to know," he said. "Brandon's appeal was denied this morning. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison." Simone nodded. She had expected this, but it was still satisfying to hear it confirmed. "What about Candace?" "She's not doing well in prison. Apparently she's convinced that you're haunting her. The guards say she has nightmares about you every night. She keeps telling people that dead women are coming for her." Simone felt a flicker of the old satisfaction, but it was tempered by something else now. Pity maybe. Or just indifference. "I suppose that's what guilt does to people," she said. The truth was, Simone rarely thought about Brandon and Candace anymore. They had consumed her thoughts for so long that their absence felt strange at first, like a phantom limb. But eventually she had filled that mental space with better things. Her students, her relationship with Ethan, plans for the future. She had used most of her grandmother's inheritance to establish a foundation that helped victims of domestic violence and financial fraud. The Eleanor Washington Foundation provided legal assistance, financial support, and safe housing for people in situations similar to what Simone had experienced. "Your grandmother's money is helping dozens of people rebuild their lives," Ethan had told her. "She would be so proud of what you've created." The foundation had also allowed Simone to work with other victims of crimes like hers. Women whose husbands had tried to kill them for insurance money. Men who had been swindled by romantic partners. Elderly people who had been defrauded by caregivers they trusted. The best part about helping other people, Simone had realized, is that it takes the focus off your own pain and puts it on something positive. As the reception continued into the evening, Simone found herself standing apart from the crowd for a moment, looking up at the stars and thinking about everything that had brought her to this point. A year and a half ago, she had been Simone Richardson, a naive schoolteacher married to a man who was planning to murder her. Then she had been Sophia Williams, a woman consumed with revenge and focused on destroying her enemies. Now she was Simone Brooks, a woman who had survived attempted murder, fought for justice and found love again. She was stronger than she had ever been, but also more open to joy and connection than she had thought possible after such betrayal. No regrets? Ethan asked, joining her under the stars. None, Simone said. Everything I went through led me to this moment. Led me to you. Led me to understand what real love actually feels like. And what does it feel like? Simone considered the question. Safe. Real love feels safe. It feels like someone seeing all of you, the strong parts and the broken parts and the healing parts, and choosing to stay. They danced to one last song as the reception wound down, and Simone marveled at how different this felt from her first wedding. Then she had been performing happiness, trying to convince herself that Brandon's love was real despite all the signs that it wasn't. Now she was actually happy, deeply and authentically, in a way she had never experienced before. As they said goodbye to their guests, Patricia pulled Simone aside for one final conversation. I have to ask, Patricia said. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had died that night? If I hadn't helped you escape? Simone thought about it. Brandon and Candace would have gotten away with murder. They would have spent my grandmother's money and probably found other victims to hurt. Justice would never have been served. So you're glad it happened the way it did? I'm glad I survived. I'm glad they were caught. I'm glad I learned what I was capable of when I had to fight for my life. Simone paused. But mostly I'm glad it's over. I'm glad I can focus on the future instead of the past. That night, as she and Ethan drove away from the reception toward their honeymoon, Simone felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected. The anger that had sustained her through the worst period of her life was finally gone, replaced by something better: peace. Brandon Richardson and Candace Miller had tried to destroy her life for money. Instead, they had inadvertently given her the chance to become someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than she had ever been before. They had wanted to make her a victim. Instead, she had become a survivor. They had tried to take away her capacity for love and trust. Instead, she had learned what real love actually felt like. They had attempted to steal her future. Instead, they had shown her what she was truly capable of when she refused to give up. The best revenge, Simone realized as she looked at her new husband sleeping beside her, wasn't destroying your enemies. It was proving that they couldn't destroy you. It was building a life so beautiful and meaningful that their attempts to harm you became irrelevant. She had survived an attack after inheriting $15 million. When her husband's new wife saw her alive in that courtroom, she had screamed in terror. But that wasn't the end of Simone's story. That was just the end of the chapter where she let other people's evil define her life. The real story, the story of healing and love and building something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal, that story was just beginning.